Hello, welcome to David Galata Book Dreamer. I'm David Galata, and I'm the guy dreaming up some books. Today on my little YouTube channel here, I'm going to be reading from just an excerpt from Veil of Strife, the second book in the Crucible Spirals Trilogy. And a lot of changes go on in that book. I know it looks really big. The print in it is very large. But even if I crunch it down, it's still too large for hardcover. I like big books, and I like to read big books. I like to write big books, although not all of my books are huge. Some of them are actually less than 300 pages. In any case, sorry about last week. I know I was going to be doing this video then, but I had some serious technical issues that had to be dealt with immediately. So I wasn't even capable of doing it at the time. So, ugh. But in any case, I am ready. Things are ready. We're all good now. So let's just get started. And again, I am doing these books in the order in which they were published. So next week, I'm going to be reading an excerpt from Painful Medicine. That should be a lot of fun too. I'm going to take just a few pages right from near the beginning of the book because there's a lot of spoilers in here. So I had to pick a spot that didn't have quite so many. So here we go. Industrial Wheel 2, Level 5. His name was Marco Nagata. At least that is what his falsified flash tats said. He had received it as a novice. When his talents became apparent, his Strifer community made sure that it was updated for those times when he had to interact with the crew of Ganges. According to the flash tats, he was a distribution manager for Industrial Wheel 2, within Stellar Sector's jurisdiction. Rarely did he ever need to show up to his supposed post. It was easy to go unnoticed by the rest of the general crew when you made sure that you were always as nasty, sarcastic, and grumpy as possible. After a while, crew disappeared whenever he showed up at the industrial reclamation plant, which suited his needs just fine. At home, he was a repurposing maladministrator, and it was his job to make sure that the crap which the Ganges crew threw away became useful for slowing the bastards down. He hated his job as much as he hated his names, either of them. Marco Nagata was a fake, a lie, no more than a shadow of an actual crew member. His true name was Louse, and it was much better suited to his noxious personality. He was a stubborn, cantankerous parasite with a love for messing with people. He had nothing but contempt for the others he worked with, for they were all useless. It didn't matter if they were also strifers like himself or the moronic crew of Ganges. He blamed them all for the ship festival they were in right now. His family line had been strifers for generations. One tall tale said that an ancestor of his had joined the protest marches during the very first octary of the movement's beginning. He didn't put much faith in that. In his experience, everyone wanted to feel special somehow, but that didn't mean they really were. If you were desperate enough, you could convince yourself that a lie was the truth. That made you even less special. Lynch chuckled to himself at the thought. That logic made the crew of Ganges the least special bunch in the universe, including his own people. What a sorry pile of losers they all were. This rotation, he was dressed in his stellar uniform. The need for him to pretend to be Marco Nagata was more pressing lately. It was no wonder, with all the crazy activities going on, it was hard to keep up with the demand for recyclables. Right now, he was leading a team of regular Ganges crew members within the recycling center at the industrial plant he supposedly worked at. He knew that they all hated him, but that didn't stop the stupid buggers from trying to be polite and proper. It was always, Director Nagata, where do we load this? And, yes, Director Nagata, no, Director Nagata. It was maddening. He felt as if he were directing robots instead of humans. It was getting confusing in his mind. One slice he was Marco, the next slice he was Louse. He could barely keep up with it all. He dreaded the rotation when he really lost his temper, and the stellar crew realized what he truly was, a strifer. Not that he felt much safer at home these past few harvests. Things have gone from bad to worse, in his not so highly sought after opinion. He stooped down a little further as he walked along with the Ganges loading crew that he commandeered. That way no one could really tell what height he was. Not that he was particularly tall or anything like that. In fact, he was fairly nondescript. Just below average height, a touch overweight, his black hair was balding, his complexion was a deep olive like so many of the crew of Ganges. He had a face that was hard to remember until he insulted your mother. In truth, that was one of the few joys in life he had left, was insulting people. He didn't bother trying such tactics with nags. His grandfather told him that the best way to insult the AI was to ignore it and tell it to piss off whenever it tried to talk with him. It was best to simply ignore nags. The damn thing was the only real threat to their activities they ever had, until recently. In the past sowings, there had been too many changes in how the Strifers were operating, and he was worried that his beloved movement had lost its way. To think that they had actually voted for Worm when there was a call for new leadership. The cold, bare decking of the recycling center was as bleak as his hopes for his people. They were being used, he was sure of it. He noticed the changes. He had been born and raised in one of the Strifer tribes. They lived in the bulkheads and below decks of the stellar sector wheel. He had been given his schooling when he was only 6 spirals old. He had endured his training at that tender age and rose to become a real nobody. He had received his name when one of his insults had made his mentor weep in public shame. The stupid bastard had deserved every tear he had shed. Even the older bullies had given him a very wide berth for fear of his sharp tongue and his ability to truly mess up a person's life with a single public betrayal. His parents had been ridiculously proud of him at the time, and he had scolded them for this whenever he could. It was good to have family. They always made excellent target practice. That thought caused him to flinch. He was no fool, for he knew his Terran history. That endless well of treachery and self-inflicted horror was an inspiration for his Strifer duty to stop the terraforming. He would never allow his people to become like the enemy. Laos glanced at the metal tubing that was jumbled about in the carry cart that the Ganges crew pushed with grunting effort. No automated loaders for them. Half of the damned loaders had Naga units on them, so he always insisted on manual carts that needed to be pushed around. He told the Ganges crew that it was good exercise for them, and pointed to their soft, flabby torsos as proof. The inane babble echoed in the corridor. A full 20 meters wide and over 10 kilometers long, it curved into the distance with a subtle grace. They talked about their favorite sports, the news on the broadcast, the latest material being shown by Nag's playlist. Empty-headed fools. They had no idea that their entire society was now crumbling around them. Here they were, sweating away and laboring hard. All the while they were unwittingly aiding in the creation of old Terran weapons that could destroy them all. Still, thinking as Marco, he appreciated their spirit despite the conditions they toiled in. Along with the steel tubing, there was a big load of gold from damaged handrails that had come in from medical sector. These would soon be melted down and reshaped for their new and sinister purpose. Another sour note entered his mind. Medical. They had hit medical sector hard. His great-grandfather, His great-grandmother had been posted there, feeding the tribe with pilfered supplies. That was before the real troubles began, when the Naga blockers had been a new and excellent toy for their use. The Strifers had been snubbed by the crew, ostracized into a corner, reviled by everyone, including themselves. In the earliest rotations, the movement had attracted the attention of a member of the inbred families, who had given them a copy of Terran history. The revelation that their galactic ecology concerns were quite real and based upon human failings had greatly bolstered the movement. Their earliest benefactors had then disappeared and left them with the ancient knowledge to do with it as they wished. Their ranks had swelled, and the crew of Ganges had reacted in the most predictable way, with scorn and attempts to silence them. Octaries of useless protests had done nothing more than to make them all voluntary pariahs. Their old benefactors had returned to them octaries later. They gave the Strifers a handful of the Naga blocking units. In their frustration and anger, the Strifers had struck out against their oppressors, sabotaging equipment, vandalizing systems, and even artworks. Heady rotations, as he was told. By the time that his great-grandfather had been born, more Strifer sympathizers had been heading into the crawlways of Ganges, behind the bulkheads and under the decks. They tapped their own water, scavenged their food and medical supplies. That was the beginning of them using the green robes. They had been leftover curtains for some conference center or planetary sector. The lurid color had been an eyesore and rejected, falling into the hands of the ultimate scroungers, the Strifer movement. The rat masks had come shortly afterwards. Now they were dependent on the ancient Benmac units, and thus equally dependent upon the demented bastards who controlled and understood them. Currently, the movement was in peril. Laos was sure of it. What did they have? What need did they have of rattlers, of suits from command sector? It stank of that evil bitch Spider, whose progeny was now running the show. He had heard rumor that some of his fellow Strifers had tested weapons on a gang of rattlers in an abandoned industrial complex. Weapons testing! Were they savages now? Since when did Strifers need any weapon other than the mightiest of them all, the truth? Something was way off course, and after the attack on Medical, he knew that he wasn't the only Strifer concerned about where they were heading. Several of his closest annoyances had muttered darkly about their lack of amusement with the act. It rankled the old school members and the more intelligent youngsters. Laos suspected that Spider was a stinking suit. In his experience as Marco, he was quite certain of it. He had seen boots like that only in one sector, command. Now this big bully Pando was calling the shots and making demands on behalf of the heels he was busy licking. Once he got home and made sure that his load of crap was improperly stashed, he would seek out that busybody fruit fly to see if he had heard anything else. Laos hated to admit it, but Fruit Fly was always good at ferreting out the truth within rumors, despite being fickle and twitchy. Then again, what can you expect from a Strifer who was not born to the path? Inductees always had a need to prove themselves and bemoaned their loss of status as crew. Why mourn something you rejected? Once Laos found out what was really going on, someone would pay for it in a way they would never forget or expect. That was why Marco was Laos after all. That was his role within his society, to tear down the jackasses who mucked with their movement. Names were powerful things among the Strifers. They meant something, denoted a kind of post or rank. That Marco Nagata was a repurposing maladministrator meant very little to anyone within Strifer culture. His role as Laos, his duty to his people, was in being a louse, and he would do his best to make life painful for those who were screwing his people over. Finally, they came to the recycling chamber that had been altered for Strifer purposes. Marco shouted out, "Okay, you miscreants, stop here! Yes, right here, you flea-brained louts! I thought you were all trained crew, not automatons! Open the hatch and get this load inside. I don't care how it smells in there. It's better than your own stink. Go ahead and report me. I've been looking forward to having a nice long chat with our doughboy of a chief. He could stand to lose a few. Why are you gently handling this crap? Scared to make some noise? Should I get your mommies to cover your delicate ears for you? Just dump it, plate brain." Crew. They would be the reason he ran off to become a stinking hermit. He watched as the 4 crew-member team started tossing the metal scrap into a heap in the very center of the 50-meter-wide chamber. Laos watched them closely. He liked to keep an eye on who was flirting with who, which ones were shirking and letting the others do the real dirty work, who was enjoying themselves a bit too much as they dumped the scrap. Such information was useful both to Marco and to Laos. You never knew when a juicy bit of information could be used to rip someone apart and thus make a better, less kindly Ganges. And that is actually snippet, I think, 3 of the first chapter of Veil of Strife. There we go, with our nice Strifer there on the cover there with some device in his hands. And that was the introduction of the character of Marco Nagata, who is mainly known as Laos, and it gives the reader a look into what it's like to be a Strifer, because the Strifers are introduced in Crew of Ganges because they are the saboteurs and the vandals who are trying to stop the mission of terraforming. And they're interrupting the broadcasts, and they're very rude and crude, and they're very insulting. And I wanted to give a character for the reader so that the reader can gain an insight into Strifer culture, how long the movement's been around, and what are they really doing? What are their real concerns? So Laos was the window into the world of the Strifers. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I enjoyed reading it. Next week, it will be Painful Medicine, an excerpt from the third and final book of the Crucible Spirals Trilogy. That's going to be very exciting, and I hope to see you all there. Please leave comments and do subscribe because it really does help. I'd like to build up more interest in this, and tell people about it. Share it on Facebook. Have fun with that. You know, the link is here. Enjoy it, and you know, just spread the word. I really hope you enjoyed. Look forward to hearing from you, and have a great week, everyone. Thank you for watching.